use them. All right. Well, thank you very much, and welcome to FIU in Washington, D.C., and welcome to FIU, because whether we're in Miami or at this property, and definitely all throughout the district, we feel that FIU in Washington, D.C. is well represented. We want to welcome you to this very important dialogue today. At FIU, we take pride in achieving solutions through our people, through policy, and through partnerships. And I think today will be a great example of celebrating how we do that, and how we do that in partnership with folks you'll meet today. In this case, focus on STEM education. For many years now, well over 10, I think many of our federal agency partners and key policymakers and corporate folks have gotten to know FIU because of our STEM education research and a lot of our funded research. Many of you in the audience have helped fund that research, well over close to $30 million in federally sponsored research focused on STEM education. But today we're going to go beyond our campus, if you will. Not only are we in Washington, but we're going to speak to and hopefully have a great dialogue in many different ways on public-private partnerships and representing FIU, how we, in tandem with the corporate sector and in other key players, like our hosts, which you'll meet soon, do that to help meet the needs for the workforce and the future STEM workforce. Before we do go on, I do want to single out a few folks because, yes, many of you all have known of our work in STEM education, but it's not without folks that are typically 1,000 miles away. Today they're here helping us achieve those great successes. I would like to introduce Rocio Benaventos. She is the Associate Director of our amazing STEM Transformation Institute, which you have some information available, and we'll hear some about our strategies there. We have our Chief Information Officer, Bobby Grillo. You'll learn a little bit, back there in the corner, you'll learn a little bit about a recently funded Department of Labor grant focused on apprenticeships and cyber apprenticeships. And thanks to Bobby's leadership, we've been able to bring in the private sector to help support that effort. Michelle Palacio up here, our Vice President of Governmental Relations, because at FIU, not only do we help advance the research and work with our private partners, but we are tackling the policy aspects, whether it be here in Washington, D.C. or in our state capital in Tallahassee as well. Many of you in the audience are our federal partners. You all are critical to this equation, and so many of our examples on workforce strategies have their roots in work we've done with agriculture or at NASA or at the Department of Energy as well. So hopefully we'll hear much about that. And of course, we have, believe it or not, a few examples of living, breathing STEM students. Could some of our students raise their hands? There you go. Whether they be working at NASA or our great program in partnership with the Department of Energy, that is really a great model for a STEM apprenticeship and meeting the needs of the workforce. We're happy that they're here today, and we hope you get a chance to meet with them. If not during this session, quick commercial following the wrap up here. We will have a nice reception on the rooftop. We look forward to hosting you there. I now want to introduce one of FIU's great partners, representing all of STEMConnector, but also as an individual. Ted Wells, the Vice President of STEMConnector, has really been critical to FIU, being at the national table, if you will, on issues regarding STEM education and STEM ed policy. So, Ted Wells.
Yes. Thank you, Carlos. Welcome to FIU in DC. It's a pleasure to be here. As Carlos said, I'm Ted Wells, and I'm with STEMConnector. We are a national organization committed to engaging stakeholders and solving our nation's STEM talent crisis. We're here today with FIU, obviously, and also our partners at Tata Consultancy Service. Tata has been a longtime partner of STEMConnector. TCS has been driving our thought leadership in a number of areas, and we're very appreciative for their support. Today's approach is to look at how public-private partnerships are transforming our understanding of the STEM workforce and are transforming our engagement in developing in communities across the country in developing a new and robust type of STEM workforce. We've been working on this event for very, very many months. and a long time, Lonnie, right? And we are very appreciative to our team at STEMConnector, as well as to Tata to TCS for helping us drill down on a topic and one that we think is really critical to this discussion. As we looked at public-private partnerships, we realized that there were a few themes that were pretty common as we looked at communities across the country. One is that stakeholders that maximize their efficiency by specializing in their primary role are limited in their ability to specialize in new areas. In other words, it's really hard for business people to fully grasp the challenges of educators and vice versa. For example, there are other examples across the ecosystem. Another one is that sustainable change requires engaging stakeholders and ensuring that their voices are heard. Third, collective impact is just that. It's collective, and we must work together if we want to see comprehensive change in our schools and our communities and then our business. With those observations in mind, we reflected on our own research, which I meant to bring a copy up with me, called Input to Impact. You should have one in your seat. Input to Impact asserts that outcomes at the individual level are more likely to improve when the system surrounding those individuals is functioning in a coordinated, aligned, and quality manner. So how do you do that? It's clear that in order to realize the outcomes that we want to see among individuals, we need collaboration among these diverse stakeholders who find themselves impacted by forces that are global in nature. So, for example, the jobs producing heavy equipment in Pella, Iowa, could be impacted by advances in technology in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon, and by business strategy developed in the Rhine Valley in Germany, with an eye on markets in South Asia. The global forces that impact business have a profound impact on the future of work. On the same side, the school administrators in Delaware County outside of Philadelphia are managing changes to state math and reading standards that require extensive implementation of professional development. Teachers in their same districts are grappling on how to manage technologies and trends that their students are importing into their classroom with their little cell phones, and how to manage social development in the context of a hyper-connected culture. The forces are powerful, and the perspective of those managing them on a day-to-day basis are essential in developing a responsive and aligned function. As Input to Impact further asserts, the complexities of our local and regional ecosystems require that we develop mechanisms to enhance cross-sector communication and collaboration, and public-private partnerships like industry and education are the key mechanism to advancing this paradigm. So, today's event aims to advance an understanding of how public-private partnerships can advance stakeholders' ability to respond to the global and local forces at play in our communities today. So we begin with a conversation between FIU President Dr. Mark Rosenberg and TCS Head of Workforce Effectiveness Balaji Ganapathy. There, you'll hear from them in a moment. So these two seasoned leaders from business and education will share their perspectives on how public-private partnerships have transformed their work in this space. We continue with a panel focused on understanding how the federal government is facilitating and encouraging public-private partnerships through the federal 5-year STEM plan. And how that plan not only supports public-private partnership, but it really thrives on them. And we'll conclude today's discussion with a case study of public-private partnership between Tata Consultancy Services and Edison Township in New Jersey that showcases both the challenges, but more importantly, the potential dividends of strategic public-private partnership. I think you'll enjoy this. So my hope, this is takeaways from today, that you will improve your understanding of perspectives of two senior leaders from industry and education surrounding the value of public-private partnerships. We have two folks who are doing a lot in this space, not only for their own institutions, but on a national perspective as well. Also want to improve your understanding of this federal STEM plan and opportunities for the abundant public-private partnerships that exist across agencies. And we have a very special partnership that we want you to understand. But it's not just to share a nice story. I think this partnership that you'll hear about in our final segment today is a great understanding, a great opportunity to sort of take a case study that, yeah, it's very particular to this community, but there are some takeaways that you could probably find a way to implement a similar partnership in almost any community anywhere across the country. So I would like to introduce my colleague and friend, Lena Klebanov. Lena is head of Tata Consultancy Services, corporate social responsibility efforts in North America. And she is doing some amazing work in this space. At TCS, Lena oversees their philanthropic and engagement efforts in communities across North America. And these efforts at TCS focus particularly on cross-sector efforts to expand diversity and access to computer science education. Lena has an amazing resume too. She's often referred to as the queen of corporate social responsibility for good reason. She's worked for companies like Time Warner Cable, Marsh McLennan, and Morgan Stanley. And she's also a very dear friend and a very kind and thoughtful leader. So, Lena, do you want...
Hi, everyone. I'm Lena Klebanov with TCS, and on behalf of TCS, I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you so much for being here. I see a lot of new faces. For those of you who are not familiar with TCS, we are a global IT company with over 400,000 employees, and I know all of them personally. We are in 46 countries, representing 149 nationalities, and we are one of the largest employers of women. So something we are extremely proud of. So why are we here today? Cross-sector collaboration for access, equity, and inclusion is at the core of our corporate social responsibility efforts. As you saw in the snippets, we focus on reskilling and upskilling employees, preparing young people for 21st century careers, and empowering girls and women. And the success that we're able to attribute really is because of private, public, cross-sector relationships that we can attribute to all of our partners. Many partners, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the World Economic Forum, Discovery Education, multiple school districts across the country, nonprofit organizations, and of course, STEMConnector. We have been working with STEMConnector for a number of years, and we've held roundtables and written subsequent white papers, all that are available online on the STEMConnector website, and covered subjects ranging from best practices in mentoring programs for women in STEM, trends in technology, scaling innovative programs, just to name a few. And the one common thread that our partnership has really encompassed is bringing everyone to the table, cross sector. And that's really why we're here today, to highlight successful partnerships and relationships, and really to encourage the fun part. And the exciting part is what happens after. So get to know each other. Not right now, there'll be time afterwards. And the partnerships and collaboration that comes after is really why we do what we do. So we're here to highlight some of those partnerships and talk about how private public sector partnerships really can create that systemic change in a world that's in a complex and ever-changing world. So thank you again for being here, and really looking forward to getting to know all of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lena. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am Leslie Cruz. I serve as the CEO of STEMConnector. STEMConnector, as many of you know, we represent a network of committed leaders who want to build a diverse, sustainable STEM workforce. As we say at STEMConnector, there is no future STEM workforce that is not a diverse STEM workforce. Our friend Jeff Weld talks all about shattering the gauge and really making sure that we are changing that overall conversation. All of the executives that we work with, they are leaders in their own right. They are driving innovative workforce solutions within key markets. The other thing that they recognize, all of the executives that we work with, is they realize that if they partner together, if they collaborate together, the impact that they deliver is going to be that much greater. A member that we work with from the aerospace industry, she said it the best. One day she says, Leslie, look, Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop, we're all competing for the same 100 people. FIU. If you're there, you feel it. And it's one that's not just centered on graduating students. Rather, he has really instilled this overall mindset across the board that there's an objective to teach students this overall skills to be successful employees. He doesn't want to just graduate students with degrees. He wants to graduate students who get jobs. And there's so much that we can learn from Dr. Rosenberg about how he's engineered this approach, and in particular, how he has leveraged public-private partnerships to do so. Dr. Rosenberg, biology. Welcome. I must say it's an honor to be sitting next to both of you. Thank you for all that you do. Dr. Rosenberg, let's go ahead and start with you. Let's go back to the beginning at FIU and your story to kick off this conversation. You're a founding faculty member at FIU, and today you're the overall president of a Tier 1 research institution. I'd be interested to hear from you, how have public-private partnerships helped FIU achieve the success that you have had today?
Well, first of all, thank you for that great introduction, Leslie. I appreciate the sensibility that you have about the things that I'm attributed to have contributed to. But I got to tell you that I'm blessed to be in a large, growing metropolitan area with a university filled with can-do faculty and highly determined students, 85% whom work full or part-time. So for our students in particular, the opportunity to get an education isn't seen as a right, it's seen as a privilege, and it's seen as a necessary step if they're going to be able to have meaningful lives and sustain their families. So we come out of a, if you will, of a very energized and energizing culture that Florida today is getting about 1,000 new people a day. And since I've been at FIU, the population of the state has quadrupled. And so we don't have a choice but to figure out new and better ways to do things. And we have the advantage of not dragging around a lot of historical baggage, a lot of legacy baggage. It's a very can-do place, very forward-facing place. And so our organizational culture is, if you will, not necessarily embedded in the same legacy myths and constructs that you would find at more traditional U.S. institutions of higher learning. We were opened in 1972. And so it's kind of true that I'm a founder, but only going back to 76, not to the, and that's not to 1876. But so I want to thank you with that. And let me start out with just a quick story on this, just very quickly. So I've had the privilege of participating in a number of Board of Science Education, National Academy of Sciences initiatives. The Barriers and Opportunities Study, I was a participant. I then had the challenge of co-chairing the STEM Indicators Study. And there we were, and this is, these studies tend to be consensus studies. They take 2 years. Everything's got to be evidence-based. And everything is based upon stuff that other people have written and empirically verified. And there we are trying to come up with the best indicators to measure quality STEM learning. And we're in basically the penultimate meeting. We're close. And this is 2.5 days every quarter of knockdown, drag-out debates and discussions about how we should measure it, what works, what's going to fit for small institutions, what's going to fit for large institutions, what's going to fit for diverse institutions, what's going to fit for institutions that are not so diverse. And we're close. And then one of the private sector representatives said, you know what, it doesn't really matter. I'm a little frustrated with this. Because look, by the time anybody pays attention to this, and by the time it gets implemented, all of science education could have changed. And what he was referring to was the exponential pace of change. On one hand, was the, if you will, the growing digitalization and datafication and commodification of what we do. And so, frankly, having presided over this exercise for 2.5 years, he really angered me when he said that. But he was right. So the challenge, I believe, that we have, that at least my experience is that at our institution is not so acute, but it's there, is how do we grapple with the linear thinking that we use in a context of exponentiality, and in a context where we know that how we teach science in the next decade is fundamentally going to change, in part because of data science, in part because of artificial intelligence, in part because of the emergence of, if you will, work routines and life iterations that were totally unforeseen when the methodologies and the epistemologies were developed for doing what we've been doing. All right, so the challenge then is, from my viewpoint, is how can I be the chief disruptor of the institution that I work at? I have a passion for learning. I have a passion for education. We want to help people when they graduate to have an impact. How do we do this in the context of change? And by the way, there is not consensus, as you know, in the STEM fields about the best way to do anything. And even though we agree that evidence-based research is critical, you can find a physics department at which there are pitched battles over whether or not that's a valid approach to restructuring Physics 101. And so, in my mind, the biggest challenge is the mindset issues related to the institutional iterations that are canonized through tradition and through regulation by outside accrediting agencies on one hand and by the disciplinary societies on the other. So the partnerships issue, what does it do? The partnerships issue gives us a different kind of external validation, a different kind of external metric, and I want that, because if I don't have that, it's harder to drive rapid change.
Well said. Yeah, the rate of change that is happening in the real world versus perhaps in some organizations to actually keep their finger on the pulse. Absolutely, very well said. You know, you all share another common thread that I picked up through my conversations with both of you, and Balaji, turning to you. You know, during your tenure at Tata Consultancy Services, you've really championed this philosophy, this notion about creating shared value. It is the hallmark of everything that you all do at TCS. What are some issues TCS has been working to resolve through public-private partnerships?
Thank you, Leslie. And I think after today, I'm going to take Leslie down. It would be love to have.
I'll be your hype girl.
Somebody who has such a lovely introduction of you. But what I want to share is that what Rosenberg has said, what Ted and Lena teed up the conversation to be about. I want to dive right into why the need is so important today, and why we need not just partnerships from a public-private perspective, but highly scaled, highly accelerated outcomes for partnerships. Pace of change is definitely there, right? But if you think about the future of work, which is a misnomer in today's, it is intentionally a misnomer in today's conversation here, because the future of work is already here. We're already experiencing, right? The rapid adoption of digital technologies within organizations, from the business side, the government side, even society and how we live, work, and play, that's already happening. We are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, and we're all trying to make sense of it as organizations, as society. But remember that any solution that we create, whether it is at a federal, state level, whether it is at an organizational level or a community level, think of who it is going to serve and when it is going to serve. The role of partnerships is important because, even if you think about the education system, higher education is well taken care of by Dr. Rosenberg and all the wonderful work that many institutions are doing. We'll come to that. But if you think about the K-12 system, every year 5 million students are coming out of the K-12 system. Hopefully, we are graduating, they're continuing their pursuit of getting the skills that they need in order to participate in the economic opportunities that are being created. Right? If solutions are not accelerated and implemented today, like the example that Dr. Rosenberg gave, it is going to serve somebody, but it's not going to serve those families. So I want you to, and all of you as practitioners, as here we have the coalition of the village, all of you are doing this work on the ground. But recognize the importance of your work, because what you are doing today makes a difference to not just those people, but their families in the future. So that's point number one. The second is that when you talk about transformational change versus the linear change, and change is there of all kinds, right? When you're talking about transformation versus linear change, you need an accelerant. You need something that is going to really have a non-linear impact on the work that you do, right? Let's use a little bit of STEM and in our solutioning as well, right? If you think about work that you do individually as an organization, you can reach only so many students, so many educators, so many communities, and we have experienced that ever since we started working in the space of STEM and education in America since 2009. We've been able to reach about 123 cities, about 5 million people who are directly impacted through the work that we're doing, whether it is through programs that we have, through partnerships that serve from a variety of perspectives, whether it is workforce development, computer science education, all of that. But when you think about what can really supercharge that, an accelerant that is needed for ecosystem level change to happen, public-private partnerships and highly leveraged partnerships, not just the conventional partnerships that we've all had exposure to in the past. What is needed is a little different. And I want to end by saying what should constitute those sort of partnerships, right? I can talk about it from the industry perspective, but also in looking at what has worked and what has not. There are 3 things that stand out for us, that inform what we do at TCS when we look at getting into and engaging in long-term private sector, public sector partnerships. One is that, I spoke about the outcomes and the need to focus on who it serves, right? The 3 areas are content, context, and connection. Why? Because the pace of the change, as Dr. Rosenberg alluded to, when was the last time a new subject was introduced in the US education system, K-12 system? Anybody venture a guess? 1930. That was when history was introduced. After that, there has been no broad core curricular change. There have been, of course, introduction of a lot of supportive resources and concepts. So we're almost 100 years behind where we need to be in terms of massive system reform. So let's not wait for massive system reform to happen, because it has its own challenges. And when we listen to Jeff Weld and what they have done with the federal STEM plan, we hear a lot of examples of solutions that can inform our. But content is important in any public-private partnership, because if curriculum has not evolved at the pace at which skills that are required at work or as entrepreneurs is evolved, you need to make some sort of connection, right? So the content and focusing on what is being served, what is being used to serve the students, the educators, and the communities is important. Second is context. You can learn algorithms, you can learn tricks, you can learn calculus, you can learn art and humanities, but the context of what you learn is as important as the content that you learn. Because the context of the world and work has changed, right? And we are experiencing that. Agile workplaces, location independent agile, you're having product owners, these are roles within organizations. Product owners who are working with businesses externally, you have engineers and designers and scrum masters who are leading teams that are multidisciplinary and diverse. This is the world of work that we live in today. So the context of how you do what you do has to translate for the partnership to have these sort of positive outcomes that is going to benefit people today. Right? And the final part I want to share is connection. It's not enough for the private sector to contribute to curriculum development and say that, okay, we're going to inform content, AI, cyber, cloud, all of those are individual technologies, right? And there's a proliferation of technologies. It's not going to be easy to make sense of it if you focus on just one technology and say, okay, AI. AI has multiple sub-technologies that are associated with it, right? So what is needed is also the connection from an industry professional, a mentor, someone who understands how this content and this context is translating into innovation, right? Making it real, making it come to life, but is also able to relate to maybe it is students, maybe it is educators. So mentorship and the role of connection is important. So that's what I want to set the context that change is happening. It's already happened. It's in progress. So we can't wait any longer. And public-private partnerships that are highly scalable, highly leveraged, highly scaled, and content, context, and connection is our way of thinking about the design of those partnerships.
Content, context, connection. Thank you. Question for you. You all have both had tremendous success in the areas of public-private partnerships. If you were giving advice to someone out there that was looking at forging kind of one of these strong relationships and high impact partnerships, what would kind of your top 3 pieces of advice that you have learned across the past couple of years of building these particular pieces? And as well, I'm a big believer in that it's also helpful to share perhaps what are some of those hidden roadblocks that you weren't anticipating coming up upon, and what are some pieces of advice that you would provide for people so they can anticipate those?
Okay, so I'll first of all, one size does not fit all. And we got to remember that public-private partnership, great concept, but you really need to understand, and I like the idea of context. You got to understand the context where you are operating and what's really doable and possible. And I'll give you 2 examples. We work with 2 very large companies, and I won't name them at this point, but your research, enough, you'll know. So company A loves our graduates, wants more of them. Matter of fact, we're the largest supplier of graduates to this company in the state. They come to us and they say they want more, and we say we need internships. I'll come back to that. And they say, okay, the way to get internship with us is that what about is through our call center. So we'd like to establish a call center at your university, and it would be one of only 4 in the state. Great, we take it on. And true to form, this company does a great job with our students, training them, paying them a decent part-time wage, which our students want, and then half, and it's over now 250, have been offered fast-track management positions on graduation. Now, this isn't necessarily related to STEM, although actually it's a company that is totally dependent upon STEM skill sets. All right? Boom, it's great. It really has worked well. Company B, new company that we work with, very large, global company, global reach, wants our students and for internships. We develop a partnership, but truthfully, it's not working well at all. We're getting 10 to 15 internships a year. It's mostly a service-related company in the tourism business, but global. So it's a, you know, it's a serious company. And 3 and 4 years go by, and still we're not hitting the numbers or having the impact that we want. So we sat down internally and we said, what's the problem here? And we realized that we were thinking that company B, generally speaking, operated the same way that company A did, meaning that they appreciated talent development, that they were committed to talent development like company A, and they had a pipeline that would enable the talent to move through in a logical career progression that would be meaningful for our graduates, not on your life. Basically, company B, the truth is their corporate culture was, let's hire talent, but we can poach our talent from companies that they've already been trained, and we don't have to do any training. All right? So we had to reset completely with company B because we really didn't do a good risk assessment on what the corporate culture was, on whether or not they believed in taking raw talent and developing, which gets to point B, second point. That I guess the conclusion I have of doing this kind of bumping and grinding for about 2 decades is that the whole mismatch argument that we're not producing people who have the right skill sets, the right STEM skill sets for industry is only half true. Because in the end, I see it as a shared responsibility. It is impossible for any academic institution to train its learners for the specificities of the occupational niche that that company wants to hire to. I believe the best we can do in terms of the 4-year or the 5-year or the 6-year process is to give our students basic skills that enable them to learn company iterations that are very proprietary, by the way, even though they're generalizable across the occupational spectrum, but they're proprietary to that company, that the best we can do is basic skills, and that what we need to urge is a much more serious national internship program. Now, that is only going to work basically for medium-sized and large-scale companies because they are the only or institutional organizations that have the capability to manage. But what you'll find is you go through the Fortune 500, every internship program at any of those companies is completely different. It's run by different people in the company. It has different purposes. It has different mentoring and coaching techniques. And the result is, if you will, insufficiency in terms of the preparation of talent for the marketplace. We can do the basics. We can't do the specificities. And we don't find that there's enough willingness to see this as a shared responsibility to prepare the workforce. Okay, and it's compounded because we are not willing to change quick enough to understand that there's a convergence between vocational and baccalaureate that requires that we offer harder skills to every discipline, because in the end, there is a convergence on problem solving and on how issues get addressed. And so therefore, it's kind of a, if you will, reluctant partners that aren't willing to see the common interest and to adapt themselves to the changes that are coming.
I think that's very insightful. Thank you for sharing both the positive and the challenges associated with that. What I want to share is that if you have to define whom you are serving, it's very similar to how you would look at a business plan. Right? Whom are you serving? What does success look like? What is the strategic roadmap for that? Who are the stakeholders who need to participate in that? And the intentionality to make sure that whatever you are building is done along with whom you are serving. Not that you build a solution and then give it to somebody and have them be consumers of that. You have to involve people who are going to be beneficiaries of the partnership to inform the design of the partnership. I can give you 2 or 3 examples in terms of what has worked for us. For example, understanding that the global skills gap and especially with the future of work, there is the doom and gloom scenario that you often hear, right? One estimate is that by 2020 we will have 65 million jobs that will be lost. The same estimate says that 133 million new jobs will be created. Depending on whose report you read, whether it is McKinsey or Economist or World Economic Forum, or depending on whom you read, there is always this equation that gets thrown in. But what is important on top of that is to realize that all of those things that are going to happen is not going to be guided by technology. It is going to be guided by people who are decision makers. There is somebody sitting within an organization or a group of institutions who is deciding how this is going to get implemented, right? So one of the things that we've been doing for 4 years now is a partnership with the World Economic Forum called Closing the Skills Gap 2020. We said that as companies, as institutions, it is important for us to inform the public and the other stakeholders, whether it is global or market level, on what has happened, make sense of the change, have a framework and a model that can be adopted easily, whether it's in a developing economy like the Middle East or a developed economy like the United States. What are common frameworks that can be used, right? And then a call to action to say, what are we as private institutions going to do about that? So initially we said, okay, let's have a goal of 5 million people to be reskilled as part of this coalition. And the coalition was a great willing coalition of companies that recognize that this problem is not isolated to creating jobs and talent for the future. Today's people who are working in our institutions today is where we should start, right? And then serve along with the education system and the government, people who are in the education system today, whether it is K-12 or higher education or an alternate talent economy. I'm very happy to say that when we started in 2015, that was the goal. Today, that coalition, Closing the Skills Gap 2020, has 17.2 million commitments for skilling people around the world. And we've already achieved 6.4 million people served, right? But we have not stopped there. We're looking at, okay, what are the case studies and exemplars of how this is happening? How are organizations doing this in-house? How are organizations partnering with others to achieve that? So those are available on the Closing the Skills Gap 2020.org website. And this is one example of how the intentionality is there in the partnership, that we have to make sense of the change. We have to have a call to action as private sector to be in the room and leading efforts to provide the solution and also provide case studies and examples. Another example I want to share is around the view that we need to have, especially as private sector, I would say, is that success doesn't mean creating a pipeline. You've always heard people talk about pipeline. I like to use pattern. Why? Because pipeline is serving my need. I've hired, our organization has hired 20,000 Americans in the last 5 years. I can hire anybody if I want to, because at the right kind of culture, the right kind of economic model, I'll be able to do that. But can I do it in scale as all organizations in this country if the larger systemic issues around STEM education and STEM skills are not solved? So it should not be just isolated to a pipeline or a partnership outcome to give, a pipeline problem. It should be a path that every American has the opportunity to participate in the economic progress that can happen to the nation because of the adoption of new technologies, because of the digital transformation, right? It doesn't mean that everybody has to be a computer scientist or a coder. Absolutely not. But you need to have as much as you know to read, write, and have basic math skills. You need to make sense of data. You need to understand how algorithms work so that you can control them instead of them controlling them, right? So having that recognition is important, and then creating partnerships that can serve that purpose, right? So with students, we understood that yes, computer science education is one pathway that can expose them to opportunities that are economic in all sectors. So we built a program called GoIT that is today in 77 cities. And one of the examples of that is what you're going to hear later today, that we're working with the Edison, city of Edison, and what is happening there. Another example of a partnership is understanding that computational thinking is a foundational skill for every child who is in a school system today, whether it is America or around the country. We developed a partnership called Ignite My Future in School with Discovery Education. Knowing the strengths of your partner is important so that you're complementing what you're bringing to the table, right? They bring the educational credentials as well as the network of reach to institutions, especially focusing on Title I and underserved schools across the country. And that has led to, and I can give you so many examples of on-the-ground partnerships that it has resulted. Whether it is with Cedar Rapids and Iowa City through the ICR and the governor's office, or with places like Harrisburg or the Dallas ISD. You look at every school system in the country, the need exists, right? The challenge is to make sense of that and say that, okay, as an organization, this is what I can serve. As a partnership, this is what I can serve. And while it is Ignite My Future, you will hear a lot about as a partnership between TCS and Discovery Education. It is not just that. There are 81 partners who are making that program come to life. And in 2 school years, we've been able to reach 500,000 students in the US education system across middle schools. And that is possible only if you have these design elements, right? Outcome focused, looking at what success means, designing the programs along with people who are going to be beneficiaries of the program, and then looking at, and this is something that Leslie alluded to earlier, we have to be aspirational. We are not here to just solve our own problems. If that is the case, we would all be sitting in our own office rooms and institutions and doing that. We are here because we want large scale change. So we have to have that aspiration that what we are doing is going to build the nation, is going to create something that will have the effect for future generations. And that can be that, that inspiration that really brings these sort of partnerships to life.
Thanks, Balaji. One last question to close us out, and the management consultant and me wouldn't let this question go by. You each have really touched on scale, right? And driving scale, and as you know, public-private partnerships could be an amazing solution to drive change across states, across the nation. And you each have a lot of those philosophies that you built in across the board. One piece that we haven't touched on that I'd be quite interested to hear your perspectives is, what do you see government's role in scaling up these initiatives? Is there a role at all or not?
Absolutely. Thankfully, we live in a free market capitalistic economy where private sector role is actually, invited and expected. We work in many countries around the world where you're going to be frowned upon if you want to do something with the education system. So in that kind of an economy, the government's role is a critical one, to be the torchbearer and look at that, what I said earlier about the visionary focus of what the country should aspire to, and define what that means. Whether it is in the moonshot in the 60s or the STEM moonshot or the digital economy moonshot today, the government has a role to bring all stakeholders together, inform them, and create that aspirational goal, and also identify where these players across sectors can come together to really make a difference. Because the government, as tax-paying citizens, all of us are contributing to the economy, and the government is prioritizing those funds and resources towards areas where they can make an impact, whether at a federal or a state level. But knowing what they would do and what they are expecting all of us as other stakeholders to do is critical. So I'm really excited about the next panel because the federal STEM plan and the ones that have preceded that have really informed our own thinking when we look at where is it that we can play, how can we make an impact, what are the issues that at different macro, micro levels that we will be able to. So the government has a really important role. No matter who's in office, whether it is the Obama administration, whether it is the Trump administration, or whichever administration comes in the future, I would say, this cause is more important than who is in the White House. The whoever is in the administration always provides the platform for stakeholders across different sectors to come together. So I personally am always looking forward to government playing an important role in informing what we should do as citizens and what we should do as stakeholders.
Dr. Rosenberg.
Well, I don't see government as a solution at all. So I have some agreements with you on that. I think platform is critical. I think government does have the platform to bring together the stakeholders. I think that government needs to think through the regulatory environment. I see the regulatory environment as a major impediment to our innovation. Let me give you an example. We are increasingly understanding that we have to move from being a student-centric institution of higher education to a learner-centric institution of higher education. And yet the regulatory environment is set up to be traditional and to measure time to degree in traditional ways and to measure graduation rates. Not to say that I want to duck those. I absolutely don't. But I also want to be engaged in the learning process for any learner who has the eligibility or the interest in learning. And so I don't see that regulatory environment being very friendly there. So I'm very concerned about that. Thirdly, the STEM indicators report was very good, painfully good, at identifying all the things we needed to measure and all the areas we weren't capable through the government of measuring them. The conclusion I arrived at is, truthfully, I'm not going to rely on government to do the measurement. There are now proprietary organizations out there, let's say LinkedIn, that are doing a heck of a job of measuring where the competencies are and how they're responding in the marketplace. That's what I need to know ultimately. So I want to find a way for us to get government out of the way and to rely upon the emergent, if you will, measurement devices that are there to give us a greater ability to be better at what we do.
Wonderful, Dr. Rosenberg, Balaji, thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom, your thoughts, your passion, your energy, and most importantly, for leading all of this work that you all do day in and day out, really making key impact in those communities where you all are playing a role. So thank you very much.
Hello again. Great. See, we've welcomed some new folks into the room, so welcome. That conversation would be very dynamic, so thank you very much. So we're going to turn our attention now to this recently released 5-year federal STEM plan. A lot of you are stakeholders from the federal government and also work significantly with the federal government. So we kind of want to provide a bit of an overview, and then we have a couple of stakeholders from agencies who we can engage with around some of the questions. So our first speaker, who looks like he's all lavaliered up, I met 7 years ago, I'm sorry, at a cocktail reception in Seedy, Dallas, Texas. Kind of reminded, it was at 2012. We had the derecho here in D.C. And at that time, he was executive director of Iowa's STEM, statewide STEM Governor STEM Advisory Council. And that meeting in Dallas blossomed into a partnership that has really yielded some really great things for both STEMConnector and for Iowa, and hopefully for others as well. Jeff recently took a year off from his duties in Iowa and came here to help develop the new 5-year STEM plan that we'll be discussing today through our National Science Foundation. And he recently just went back to Iowa to return to his duties as executive director. He's a national leader around STEM education. He is a really thoughtful guy, and I look forward to listening to his presentation. Hold it close to your.
Wonderful, Ted. How's my microphone? This one live?
Okay, we'll try that just in case.
Try one more time. I do have a teacher voice I could muster if I really have to. It's a little rusty. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, TCS and FIU and STEMConnector for this incredible opportunity. How's this? It's an incredible opportunity because our baby is 6 months old, approximately. Yeah, that is definitely what we call it. I call it our baby, incidentally, because there's several folks in this room who had a lot to do with its production. In fact, hundreds. It's not a stretch to say over 1,000 people had hands in the development of this, and many, many more indirectly. Those who shaped the plan to be what it is, and so we're forever grateful to all the contributors. It is by, of, and for the STEM community, this document. It's reflective of a STEM consensus, which makes it a nonpartisan, bipartisan, apolitical guidepost, North Star, quite purposefully, a NASA image. We're grateful to Mike Kincaid and his crew for producing the North Star cover for the nation. And that's a significant evolution from STEM Plan 1. You probably all are aware that in 2013, the first federal STEM plan was generated, and it was a beautiful document. It's very scholarly. It had slightly different focus. It was much more dense and maybe prescriptive in some ways, and maybe later we can get into how it might differ. But in this case, turning outward, not only functioning as a coordinative tool for the federal agency, who you'll hear from in just a second, but also a North Star for all of America, all of us STEM stakeholders, state, private sector, nonprofits, to be able to anchor aim our sails to a row in the same direction as it were, so we can make much more progress, much more rapidly than the scattershot Wild West that has characterized the United States STEM education since its dawn, sometime in the 90s, I think we attribute STEM's birth. But it is a 5-year renewal of a plan that answered the America Competes Act in 2010. Some of the folks you'll hear from had more of a hand in that 2013 plan, certainly, than I did. In fact, confession, I was 3 years into leading my state's STEM program, communicating frequently and intricately and intensively with my peers across the country. None of us knew there was a federal STEM education strategic plan in 2013, and I think the reinvention of wheels that we all have gone through and how that could have been avoided. We could have really cut to the chase here had that 2013 plan had more of an outward face to it as well as an internal. But like everything we do, second time is the charm. First time was a rugged prototype, and now I think we're getting it right. It's the sequence of events that accumulated the content of this document were input sessions, hundreds of meetings, all between January 2018 and September of 2018, last year, averaging 2 to 3 meetings per day with leaders of organizations ranging from the Society of Women Engineers. TCS was kind to share ideas with me, as was STEMConnector, as was FIU and MIT and UC Berkeley, and the After School Alliance and the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, the American Association of Physics Teachers, the Computer Science Teachers of America. A stream of leaders made their way to the OSTP in the Eisenhower building over the course of that stretch, January to September, and all of whom had their ideas considered carefully. Federal agencies as well. You'll hear from several today, but 15 federal agencies were involved in this development. So this slide is to convey to you this, what I mean by this document being by, of, and for the people of STEM education. The staircase, you might recognize the Navy steps outside of the Eisenhower building overlooking the West Wing, was the site of a first ever in history federal state STEM education leadership convening just over a year ago. It was late June of last year. Much cooler weather such that we could gather on the steps and not sweat it out. But there were 200 representatives, over 200 from across the country, channeled to us through governors. We put out an invitation inviting all 50 states and territories and Native American tribes to send representatives to us and share their thoughts of what should be in the next 5-year plan. I'm so pleased, proud, and maybe shocked to say all 50 states were represented. A great symbolic testimony to the bipartisan, non-political agenda or endeavor, which is STEM education. And here we were gathering on the steps. Some of you are probably in that picture with Mr. Bridenstine and Ms. DeVos and Joan Mundy of NSF, myself. Next to me, Michael Praxios, who hopefully soon will be confirmed by the Senate to be the Chief Technology Officer for the President. But in addition to that, an amazing committee was born of the American Innovation and Competitiveness Act. Last year, convened for the first time a panel of 18 experts from across the STEM spectrum around the entire country to advise this emergent document. At the time they convened first, September of last year, we were just getting to a draft document. And I can never thank enough the federal writers. When the intake was over, we assembled in intimate rooms and began to roll up our sleeves. Many vacations were foregone. I was getting draft documents from people in hammocks in Maine, and that's a tribute to many of the federal writers. Marlene, I want to thank you, and Carol, and those you'll hear from in just a second who put it together. I also want to point out Gabby Gonzalez, who serves as chair of the External STEM Advisory Panel. They meet again this Friday to weigh in on the next phase, which is implementation, that we'll hopefully get to in just a little bit. That's the source of inspiration for the document. That's why I can say with confidence it's closely reflecting what we heard from the panel of Mark and Balaji seconds ago. Convergence and computational thinking and partnerships. There's nothing new under the STEM sun, but what I think and hope we are giving to the federal agencies as well as the nation is consensus, aim, guidance, so that we're more efficient. Here's the 15 agencies plus the OSTP that are involved now in the production of the document, and are the principal purpose for its formation is to coordinate their activities. And so we're amazed, and I'm forever humbled that this got knocked out in a period technically between July and you saw a draft in September, which is amazingly, shockingly humbling that a federal document can be produced in that speed with such efficiency and with such expertise that a lot of people put their day jobs aside. And that's thanks to the leadership of these agencies who allowed Marlene and Carol and so many to spend so many hours with us, putting who knows what other duties aside. It has 3 overarching goals, and this is culled from all those meetings. I've got 7 minutes, right? You give me the hook. Everybody I've met with, we met with, all had the same ambitions. Every federal agency contributor, every university head, every nonprofit leader, every university president, all said these same things over and over again. They became so high frequency, they became overarching goals. Everybody agrees with the diversity imperative. If we don't get more young Americans of diversity engaged in STEM education, we have a train wreck coming. It's an economic imperative. More importantly, it's a moral imperative, and everybody bought it. Therefore, diversity, equity, and inclusion is woven throughout this plan. Everything that's in it is anchored to its support of a diversity and inclusion priority. Same along the lines of workforce preparation and career readiness. Everybody feels that's a top priority, and thus woven into everything that constitutes this plan. And a STEM literate citizenry for America. There's 3 educational pathways that manifested through all of these inputs. I'm so pleased that strategic partnerships is number 1. Everybody recognizes that the path forward is only going to be possible through partnerships. Quick side story, in the 1970s and 1980s, there was a movement in America called the STS movement. I'm looking for recognition of the acronym. Science Technology Society was the name of the movement. Science education was really taking it and running. I was working on my doctorate in the 90s, and my doctorate advisor was Professor Robert Yeager, credited with being the father of the STS movement. He's getting up there in the years, he's feeble, and I said to him lately, Professor Yeager, STS has morphed into STEM. I think we're building on your foundation. How did it come to be that STS didn't survive. And he said, we were missing a leg of the stool which STEM has captured. STS movement was a federal, state education partnership. A lot of money flowed from the NSF to fund teacher professional development and student curriculum development, et cetera. But the private sector, the world of industry, wasn't part of the equation. So Professor Yeager is quite confident that STEM is here to stay and sustainable because it's got all three of these critical partners at the table. There are three priorities that we now call objectives that constitute strategic partnerships. The fostering of STEM ecosystems. We clearly didn't invent that concept, but we sure do hope to put it on steroids. That wonderful things happen when communities connect all the stakeholders in ecosystems. So organizations like Jan Morrison and the TIE's STEM ecosystems really giving us quite a lift. Work-based learning, Mark mentioned the imperative for internships, job shadows, externships for educators and professors, and successfully blending practices from across the informal, formal. A second pathway is convergence. I was so glad to hear Mark talk about the importance of big questions, dismantling some of the silos that typify STEM education today. In particular, promoting entrepreneurship and innovation in classrooms across America and outside of classrooms for that matter. Mathematics, they've been called out. Make math a magnet to STEM, not a filter. And transdisciplinary learning. Convergence is a hot topic in the sciences. We're going to make it a hot topic in STEM as well. And computational literacy, thank you, Balaji, for, I think it was an idea about a year ago, next month, that we met and talked in depth about computational thinking and what imperative that is for learners of STEM across the country. So you'll see that we're encouraging digital literacy, cyber safety education across the country, and likely more foundationally, insisting almost verbatim to your comments, sir, that computational thinking be embraced and integrated into every educational experience of every learner, not relegated to the computer science wing of a school or a college, and digital platforms to level the playing field. Finally, this is not an educational pathway. It's really one that's mandated by the America Competes Act, but has not been fully realized. It's going to be fully realized now because there's a section in the plan calling out all federal partners with regard to transparency and accountability on all that we do. The $3.2 billion a year collectively invested in STEM education by all of us through our federal partners is typically evaluated and reported upon, but often not. And so you'll find in this case, evidence base is a priority. Let's collect evidence on what we're doing, especially if we all agree that underrepresentation and amplifying the participation of learners of diversity is a goal. Let's prove it, let's measure it, and let's use data to feed back on whether our money is being well spent. If programs are helping us with that goal, amplify them. If they're not, extinguish them. And that's what's likely to come. And public available data, very exciting component of the plan, but a little bit wonky and internal. But I love the example that sets for the rest of the nation. The feds are all about transparency and accountability, metrics that support goals, and feedback into what we do. Page 7 of the document's a lot of fun. I just love this dot chart. It's evolved since this, by the way, but each agency, Carol and Marlene, were part of this ask that we were pretty scared to make, but that was down the left side, the objectives of this new plan. Agencies across the top, put dots where you commit. And here are the dots. It was a rather dramatic exercise, but they did it, and it's public, and it's a moving, evolving schematic now. But you look at USDA, I'm so grateful. They got it all covered. And everybody else is somewhere on that journey sooner or later to support these objectives in a variety of ways that I think Carol and Mojde will share with you in a few minutes. So that's it. It dropped on December 4. It was published. Since January, it's been out. There was a government shutdown there that I'm not counting when I say 6-month-old. But it really depends on opportunities like this to share it with you, as it didn't come with a dissemination budget. So all we have is people like us making the circuit, helping the United States and the globe be aware that this document exists so that you can leverage it and that you can feed back to us, and collectively we can achieve this North Star vision for STEM education. I hope that's 7 minutes, Ted. You didn't glare at me, so thank you all for the opportunity. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Leave it on. Have a seat. Oh, the clicker. Need that. So one of those agencies that you saw that had all the dots was USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, and our panelist from USDA today is Mojdeh Bahar, where she's the Assistant Administrator for Technology Transfer at ARS, Agricultural Research Services. She leads technology transfer efforts ranging from invention harvesting to implementation of intellectual property. She works very closely with cross-sector stakeholders, including corporations and universities, on matters of intellectual property and technology transfer. And its role in supporting the STEM-intensive industry, USDA requires a robust STEM workforce and has a number of resources that support STEM education through the power of public-private partnership. So please welcome Mojdeh Bahar. I'm going to provide an overview and then we'll see a video.
So good afternoon, and thank you very much for having us. Thanks for that wonderful and informative presentation that basically set out the three overarching goals that all the agencies have, as well as identifies the 4 pathways that we have all committed to make an effort and implement. So I have chosen some examples. This is by no way exhaustive. This is supposed to be things that capture diversity, capture inclusion, capture all of the goals and pathways that were highlighted in the plan, and hopefully by the end of it you'll have gotten just a flavor of some of the things that we do at USDA. So I work at the Agricultural Research Service, that's the research arm, and in 2018 alone, Agricultural Research Service reached over 76,000 students. We did this through training of students and interns, through education of postdocs, through school and community presentations. Many of us judge science fairs. We do courses and demos and location visits. And we're incredibly lucky in that for years, we have been co-located with our land-grant universities. And so there is an ongoing, not just a collaboration among our scientists, but teaching and making sure that the STEM force is educated. So we have always had that. In terms of highlighting some of the activities that you might have heard of, is we are obviously a robust participant in the USA Science and Technology Festival, which takes place with a lot of our, not just federal agencies, but also a lot of our private sector partners. We co-sponsor many STEM activities with NASA, as we are very closely located, the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center and Goddard Space Flight Center. We have many internships, scholarships, and fellowships offered to students middle school and higher through the postdoctoral fellowships. I wanted to think about things that you might have heard of. And one of the programs that I think everybody knows about is the 4-H program. And different counties around the nation have different types of 4-H programs, and they offer different things. But when we think of agriculture, we seldom think of coding, or we don't necessarily think of artificial intelligence. Microsoft had a program in which many of the 4-H centers competed, and the one in North Dakota won. And so they got a chance to learn about the integration of technology with agriculture, which I think it's not only powerful, but also necessary for today's scientific landscape. So that's one example of us working with 4-H and the Future Farmers of America in order to work with them alongside of our private partners to make sure that the needed education is provided. There is a very neat program called Journey 2050, which is a game platform that was brought to life by some private sector partners, the National Ag in the Classroom organization that is supported by USDA. And it's a gaming platform that folks can, from middle school 7th through 12th grade can participate in and compete against each other. They basically cultivate land virtually in 5 countries, and they come up, whoever comes up with the most sustainable farm wins. So it's a way of integrating what the youth today are engaged in with STEM education that has been very powerful. We also have programs that capture middle schools and inner city environments. Again, we might not think of ag in an urban setting as frequently, but there's a lot of urban setting that can be helped by agricultural education. For example, there is a program in Baltimore City at a school called Green Academy, the Green Street Academy, and the goal is not only to give them skills necessary for education that they need as high schoolers, and actually the academy is from 7th through 12th grade, but also there is a lot of USDA agencies engaged in providing equipment, in teaching the courses, in familiarizing them with the STEM that is specific to agriculture, and making sure that it's a comprehensive agricultural high school, in addition to what they have to do in their high school classes, which has been a very powerful collaboration between a school system, some nonprofits, and some USDA agencies. Another example of that is a program that we have called the Girls Go Green, which is a way to empower girls and communities that suffer from poverty to use skills in landscaping and to make sure that they can transform their immediate environment. So this is STEM, not just as a way to empower and educate, but STEM as a way to help transform communities, which I think is incredibly powerful. With that, I wanted to actually show a video to you, and let me tell you why I want to show a video. And I took a minute and a half out of the comment section to show this. I think that when we think about, when I have a 16-year-old, and whenever we talk about agriculture, her vision, and I think her contemporaries' vision of what sciences are involved in agriculture are not always on point. And so the breadth of what agriculture encompasses is so vast and so wonderful that I think anything I can say would not be as powerful as the video that we are about to show you, so that you'll get to see, when we say STEM, this is really the convergence of all different disciplines that we have talked about.
USDA, we're more than the grade mark on your steak. We are leaders of research, science, and technology across America. What kinds of research? We're extracting cancer-fighting chemicals from soybeans and black raspberries. We're using satellites to sense soil moisture from 400 miles above Earth. And we've harnessed the power of radio frequencies to kill harmful salmonella in eggs. Truth is, your U.S. Department of Agriculture is leading cutting-edge science to meet the challenges of food security and safety, nutrition, and building the bioeconomy, all in a sustainable way. We're doing it through grants and partnerships at land-grant colleges and universities, and through long-term studies at our network of USDA research centers. Our researchers were into science, technology, engineering, and math way before STEM was a thing. Chances are our researchers are working in your state, your county, your community, your own backyard. From breakthroughs in biofuels to countering climate change, success stories in science are being written every day at USDA.
And I think the power of that video is basically to move you from basic sciences. You saw instances where they were using basic biology, chemistry, and physics, to agricultural engineering, to AI, to sensors, to basic physics. And so I think because of that, we have the opportunity and the chance to engage not just a sector of the STEM force, but many people in the STEM force.
We're going to move these together a bit, and so we can. I think the lavaliers aren't working so well. Let's just do handheld. Yeah, you two can share that one, and Carol and I will share this one. So we have one more panelist to introduce to you today, Dr. Carol O'Donnell. Everybody knows about the Smithsonian. You first think about like Night at the Museum or maybe the Air and Space or the National Gallery or the beautiful new Museum of African American History and Culture. But you don't know about this. You've probably never heard, if you don't work in the education space, about the Smithsonian Science Education Center. It's the only part of the Smithsonian that is completely dedicated to the formal education sector and has been at it for a long time. I see some folks in the room, Randy back there, who's been a part of it since very beginning, and a lot of folks, and one of them is right here, is Carol O'Donnell. And Carol actually was one of the founding members, right, of the what was it, the National?
So the National Academy of Sciences and the Smithsonian got married, had a baby, and it was called the National Science Research Center at the time.
National Science, which is what it was when we started STEMConnector, and then it morphed into the Smithsonian Science Education Center, which is a good name because it makes you kind of realize that it's the Smithsonian. And then she took a break from that work and went over to the Department of Ed, and then came back to the Smithsonian to become the director. So Carol has been she sort of is all over the place, both globally and in the United States, and has been actively involved with Jeff in writing this. So that's why we asked Carol to join us today, and maybe just give a little bit of an overview, a thumbnail of some of the work you guys are doing. Talk briefly about laser, and then we can kind of go into our discussion, if that makes sense. Great.
So I always like to ask this first question. How many of you have ever been to the Smithsonian? Good. In a room like this in Washington, D.C., we certainly hope to see everyone's hand go up. But as Ted mentioned, the Smithsonian is a very, well, I'll say a complicated place, because we are a massive nonprofit who is quasi-governmental. So we have to behave like the government. We follow all federal rules, but we're a nonprofit. And we like to consider the government as our biggest donor. So when you think about public-private partnerships, and I heard Lena, earlier today say it's really about cross-sector collaborations, because it's public, it's private, it's social sectors, all coming together. And just to address your question about kind of what we do, in our efforts around STEM education, an institution like the Smithsonian depends on its partnerships with others. We get some money from the federal government, which helps keep our buildings open for free, allows the National Air and Space Museum, for example, to now fix the outside of the building, which has fallen apart. But it also, the rest of it is all programmatic. And in order to keep the doors open for free, the federal government provides that money. But to do programming across the nation and the world, we have to raise every penny. So one of the programs you mentioned is laser. So there are three primary things the Smithsonian Science Education does. We promote active STEM teaching and learning through developing instructional materials, through digital assets for youth, all free, to leadership development. And LASER, which stands for Leadership and Assistance for Science Education Reform, is what I like to call, I don't know if I can say this, but kind of the original STEM ecosystem. And this idea was always that we knew change wouldn't happen in school districts unless local community partners, whether they're museums, university partners, local corporations, who are deeply invested in what happens in a region, were actually working with the school system. So that's how LASER came to be.
Awesome. Thank you. So Jeff and Mojde and Carol, I think anybody can hop in on this question. What are some of the biggest challenges confronting the future workforce from where you sit? And sort of a follow-on to that is, why is public partnership deemed as one of the key pathways by the federal STEM plan?
I'll keep it short and sweet and pass the mic down, but it's obvious to everybody in this room. The chief challenge is that the world of work, certainly in this country and around the world, has evolved far more rapidly than the world of education for a lot of reasons. That's a piranha pit of competitiveness in the world of manufacturing. When there's a good idea spawned by a company, whether it's Lean or Six Sigma or whatever it might be, suddenly it's replicated across that world. And we in education know too painfully well, you can have a great idea at FIU or Des Moines High School, and there it shall die. Schools and universities aren't very borrowing. If it wasn't their idea, it often doesn't spread. So a chasm has emerged, principally driven by technology, of course. The job has so rapidly changed that the production of a graduate once competent in basic mathematics and communications could land an entry-level corporate occupation is long gone. And so partnerships are, if there is a panacea, it's bridging these worlds of education and the worlds of the employer, the workforce and industry. And that's, I think, our great hope in the STEM plan is that we drive through ecosystems and some other activities I described, more connections purposefully between those who develop curriculum and prepare the future worker, including educators who are having to come to a reality in some instances that workforce development is their charge. And if they produce graduates who may be globally sensitive, compassionate citizens, but they can't solve a problem or design an algorithm, we haven't done them a great favor. So that's the strategic partnership value, and that's the significant challenge as I see it.
Just to speak to the partnership piece of it, I think that so public-private partnerships allow the leveraging of resources, which I think is huge on a practical sense, in a practical sense. But I think more importantly, it brings different views to the table, which in any area is important. But I think in the area of education is even more important, because that's in a way the partnership can model what you expect the students to do, which is be open and willing to engage people that might have a different vantage point. To make sure that you can move things forward. And I also think that public-private partnerships help in sustaining efforts. If we're all in it together, we're not going to let it, perish. We're not going to let it die. Somebody's going to make sure to go ahead and make sure that it's fruitful, especially if the partnership is strategic and important to every single partner. It's going to have different levels of importance to everybody, but as long as every player has some skin in the game and it's important to them, the chances of it disappearing, I think, diminish, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
So I just want to build on one of the comments that you made, which is that one of the problems with public education in particular is the politicization of education. And unfortunately, state superintendents come and go. They can easily get fired by a governor. Local district leaders may come and go. And oftentimes the stable entity is the local sectors that surround the public school or the schools. And by developing solid public-private partnerships in which all of those entities that surround the school actually become a part of the effort, there is more stability. And I think that's an important point. I think the second thing that's a major challenge is that when we talk about STEM, and this goes back to Balaji's comments earlier, as well as the president of the university, is that it is not about 4 separate disciplines that are even integrated, because there's so much more that should be happening when you think about, as Balaji mentioned, kind of the context, which is that it's not just about science, technology, engineering, and math coming from the Smithsonian. It's also about, every time I give a talk, someone asks me about art or history or culture. And we have to remember that while STEM is used as an advocacy term, we're really talking about many domains. And Lena used the term transdisciplinary learning in your opening remarks, and I think that's absolutely crucial, that it's multiple disciplines, not just those 4.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I love the picture, Jeff, you had of the White House summit, which I was there last year, and Balji, you were there too, I think, right? At with the picture, I kind of realized that like a lot of those people aren't there anymore. To your point of these people, a lot of these officials are in and out, and we've got folks in the room who've been in these agencies for a long time and who are the institutional memory of a lot of this work advancing. And the political figures come and go, but there are these folks on the ground who continue to do the work, and that's the case locally. That's also the case right here in Washington and across the country throughout our agencies. There's a lot of your colleagues at USDA that are career folks who know this space really, really well. It's important to tap into them. I want to kind of move a little bit more to, because we're trying to catch up a little bit. Thinking about you, Jeff, I love how you mentioned like diversity and inclusion sort of woven throughout. one more plug for our research for input to impact. One of our assumptions in input to impact, and there's summaries there, and there are full copies on your way out, is that the future workforce, STEM workforce, if we are going to have a future STEM workforce that adequately serves the needs of our nation and our nation's employers, it must be diverse. This is not because it feels good. It's because it's not even. It is obviously a question of equity and inclusion, but and also there's an economic imperative to this question. So, wondering if you could kind of talk about what that looks like in the plan. Maybe you could sort of address some more specific pieces, Jeff.
I'll kick it off and we can get specific. Well, like I mentioned, diversity, inclusion, and equity rose to the top as a priority for every imaginable constituency, federal and external, and thus it becomes an overarching or interwoven goal. And each stakeholder has a different responsibility with regard to fulfilling that goal, right? If you're a corporate investor in STEM education activities at the pre-K through collegiate or for life for that matter, and you support an inclusion, equity, diversity goal, then you channel your funds to programs that have proven themselves to be effective in helping to reach that goal. But it's that moment there, the asking for evidence, that it seems to be where we have fallen down, trickling all the way down to the classroom. As a former classroom teacher, I can tell you, urban St. Louis, and I was as guilty as every science teacher who would crank out the grades at the end of a semester and then hit the road for summer, for what have you, not pausing to analyze grade distributions. My school student environment was 50-50 white-black. I should have stopped and reflected on my grade assignments to see that the A's were 50-50 and the B's and the F's even might have all been 50-50. So I have an equitable, inclusive, diverse, welcoming science platform for students. So even at that level of the classroom, there's a responsibility on everybody's parts, up and down the talent production chain, to hold each other accountable for that goal. Otherwise, it becomes, lip service.
Some of the programs that I highlighted are specifically catered to make sure that we attract, for example, minorities in rural environments. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, one thing we don't necessarily think about is the urban-rural divide, right? So we think of many, many different things as we should, but there is also the urban-rural divide as well that we need to pay attention to, and we do that through some of our programs. I mentioned some programs that are specifically for girls, some programs in inner-city middle schools, some programs that hope to attract more women and minorities to science as well.
So it's interesting because the American Alliance of Museums wrote a book actually it's like a briefing that was recently released on the internet called Facing Change. And in it, they actually use the acronym DEAI, diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. And they define these four terms, and it's really enlightening because I know that as we were writing the plan, I think we started off just using the term, if I remember correctly, diversity. And I think we quickly realized you can have a bunch of people in a room and you can look around and say, we've got a really diverse set of people. That's great. But we're not providing equitable opportunities to them. We are not making certain that they, if they have different ability levels, that there's accessibility, and we may not also be treating them justly with equity. So this Facing Change from the American Alliance for Museums defines why it's so crucial that when we talk about this work, that we don't just say, and this has to do with the workforce as well as the work in education, that we are making certain that we are serving a diverse population, that the population in teaching in particular matches the student population. There was just a wonderful research article from the AERJ's American Educational Research Journal that said across a meta-analysis of articles that it is incredibly important that the student population looks like the teaching population, and it doesn't. There's a lot of disparity. So I think as we talk about this work, it's important that within the workforce, we have a diverse, equitable, inclusive, and accessible environment, and that we're preparing students who enter the STEM field to also match that. So I think as we talk about an integrated STEM effort, we should also talk about an integrated diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion environment.
We're kind of up against time. There is going to be time afterwards to network and connect. Is there a specific question that's particularly compelling that would benefit everybody? A lot of qualifications there for a question. Don't be nervous. Is there? Yes. Here, let me shoot.
We'll make it applicable to everyone.
You mentioned that the work.
Yep, just talk about
Okay, that you mentioned that the workforce requirements are increasing much more rapidly than education. Like education can't keep up with the requirements for the workforce. What would be your recommendation, or anyone else that feels like they have something to contribute? What would be your recommendation for a student who's had to deal with the education the way it is right now? Like, I'm graduating in a couple of months, and it's pretty disheartening to hear that, like, maybe my education wasn't sufficient. And now I'm kind of like, what do I need to do so that I can be so that I can get a job, right, in a couple of months?
Well, you're very fortunate to be at Florida International University, right? You have a president who is on the front edge of this thinking, and if every university had such leadership, we'd be in far better shape. I'm going to sum it down to one thing: work-based learning opportunities. It's the second priority under that pathway of strategic partnerships. Everybody from preschool, informal, formal, high school, collegiate, internships, apprenticeships, pre-apprenticeships, job shadows, even job board collaborative projects. They're happening in pockets of America, and that's how it ends up in the plan. And once again, we didn't invent the concept. We just want to see it expanded. So if I were you, I would seize upon and insist upon work-based learning opportunities that apply what you're learning in your content courses at every turn. There was a book published last spring. It's actually a republication of a book called How People Learn, the Bible of Cognitive Science. It's actually How People Learn 2. How People Learn 1 came out in the year 2000. A tome, 400 pages. Everything you want to know about how people learn. Well, here's the spoiler alert. That can all be summed up by saying it has to be an authentic, meaningful, relevant, experiential opportunity on the part of the individual, and that's how people learn. And that's mostly what work-based learning is, in concert with an educator.
Well, why don't we leave some space so that we can have some networking after this. And I also think that I want to make sure there's enough time for this last panel, because I think it's a pretty cool story. So thank you all very much for contributing to this discussion. And we look forward to what can come out of this in terms of engagement with the opportunities presented in the plan. And you guys will be around to connect with people afterwards, I trust, correct? All right, thank you. Cheers.
All right, thank you, Ted. I know that we're running a little bit over and we don't want to keep you too much between this and the beautiful drinks on the rooftop. So we'll move things along. But so I'm Ashley Zofer. I'm also with STEMConnector. I lead external relations for STEMConnector. And I'm excited because this next part of the day is when we're going to really get a chance to dive into an actual partnership. So throughout the day, we have heard all of this incredible value and how you can have public partnerships and the impact that you can really have when you grow and scale those appropriately. And it's so exciting to know that these are opportunities that are there and that there are people who are really doing this work. So in this next conversation, we are going to have two people who have a great partnership, and we're going to learn a little bit about what they did to really kick that partnership off, how they've mitigated some of the challenges that they have faced in that, and then just also how they think about growing and scaling and also measuring impact, because that's not always something that's really obvious when you're starting some of these opportunities. So you've heard from Lena and Balaji today about Tata Consultancy services and some of the tremendous work that they're really doing to ensure that there are learning experiences in all the communities they serve across the world where people can get the future of work kind of in their hands and actually understand it better. And one of those incredible programs is their Go IT program. So that is an opportunity for participants to actually learn more about design thinking, to actually troubleshoot their own designs, refine their communication skills through presentations, and just get hands-on real-world learning experiences that prepare them for the future of work. So what's interesting about this next partnership is that although GoIT is doing this, you have a manual about it in your chair here, but they're doing this across the world, and it's incredible work. But this is an interesting partnership because as opposed to being partnered with, a nonprofit organization, it's actually with the township of Edison, New Jersey, which is where Tata Consultancy Services North America headquarters are located. So without further ado, I'm going to bring to the front here Lonnie Wisham, who leads government and community partnerships for Tata Consultancy Services, and Melissa Perelstein, who is the chief of staff at the Township of Edison Mayor's Office. So if you guys want to come join us on the stage here. All right, thank you. So I would love to just start with some introductions, but in particular, I would love to hear more about your role, but in how you think about partnerships as they inform that role, and what the role of partnerships really is as you think about your own work.
Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me down today. I have to say our partnership with Tata has been tremendous. It's been very organic in nature, so I feel a little bit bad here hearing about all these matrices and all these measurements, and it kind of just happened very naturally. But I think the three things that are most impactful or important here, it was number one, recognizing a program that had an impact in our school system. I don't know how long Tata had been running the GoIT program, but it just so happened the mayor and I went to go see their final presentations, and I think the mayor judged, and I tagged along and was just really impressed with the students, the caliber of student that was there, but more importantly, the sense of profound accomplishment that they had in presenting their apps, and also the collaboration. So that started me thinking, because at the time in Edison, we were having a really big problem. Edison is kind of a tale of two cities in the sense that we are considered a very wealthy community. We're 32 square miles. We almost have a population of 100,000. But with that, we have one segment of the population that is Section 8 housing, and it's tucked back around what would be multi-million-dollar homes. So it's kind of unique to have that situation. And we were having some big issues with vandalism. And it was most likely the students or the young people in our Section 8 housing. And people were in an uproar about it. The police kept going there and were being called out, and the community around them did not understand the situation, and they wanted us to build a wall. Sounds familiar, right? And with that, I started asking some questions, saying, hey, what kind of social programs, social outreach, what kind of supportive services are in the community? And much to my surprise, there weren't many. It's kind of tucked away in kind of a forgotten area, very underserved population. And what I like to say is if you're underserved in Edison, you have two strikes against you, because you're dealing with that circumstance, but then you're also dealing with the situation that we don't have structured social services in our community because there's not a lot of people who need it. So with that recognition, we started on this odyssey of recognizing, let's get to the root of the problem. Let's try and bring some sort of mentorship program to this community, recognizing that we were having all of these other problems, but really getting to the root issue. And that odyssey began with us hiring somebody who was from the community, who, as you know, follows the path that most kids in that community think of in terms of athletics. Had gotten a scholarship to Temple and then played professional football with the NFL, but got an injury and was lucky enough to have him come on board. The mayor hired him as his other appointment and said, okay, you're going to go in and let's try and make some inroads there, because I recognized wholeheartedly that someone like myself could not go in and kind of evoke the change because I didn't have those connections or the identification that somebody like Mike Campbell, who was also our partner in this, had. So we began an odyssey of trying to figure out how we did this, and really was from the ground up. I had no research to do or anything. That was a luxury. So what we did was we ended up, after seeing Tata's presentation at one of our middle schools, I said, this seems like a really good idea because we have to provide these. I don't even know if these students have any knowledge that they can be a part of this STEM or this economy. They only really think of themselves after working with them for this past year and a half. Their two paths to success are either through athletics or through music. So with that, met Lonnie. He maybe would think it was a good thing, gave me his card, and I actually followed up. And then we decided, we sat for a couple meetings. Lena was kind enough to come down and work with us as well, and provide their resources because they had done this in other communities and they had a model. So I think the other thing that was really important here was they had a tried and true model that then we could take and modify a little bit, right? And yeah, so that's how it all kind of fell into place. We had a need. We recognized what we thought we wanted to bring to the table. We also, with this first mentorship round, Go IT was part and parcel with some other technologies that we helped as well, that we brought in, but Go IT seemed to resonate with the kids the most. So it's kind of like trial by error. And they loved the fact of learning about doing the app and creating it and the pride, but also their presentation skills, I think, were great.
So I just don't know if you want to build on that at all with, from Tata's perspective, this was a bit of a unique partnership for you. So how did this partnership emerge for you and how did it come to be?
Yeah, so for us, as someone mentioned earlier, we have a presence obviously in Edison, New Jersey, like our corporate headquarters is right there. So the Edison community is a very important one for us. And we had been doing the Go IT program at Woodrow Wilson Middle School for quite some years at this point. And we also do just like a overall STEM day where we work with the students. So we had a pretty good relationship, a pretty good working relationship with that community already. And so with the Go IT program, one of the things that is my job is to make sure elected officials know about what we're doing in their communities and try to figure out ways that we can work with them to build on the current work that we're doing, because obviously they know their communities a whole lot better than we do. Even though we're still in Edison, New Jersey, we're never going to have the insights that the local government will have, right? So we invited the mayor to come speak to the students. And I think it actually was the day after he had done the state of the city or the state of the township address. So he actually didn't speak to the students, but he did stay on and judge, and he walked around and really interacted with the students. And I was able to speak with Melissa during that time. And it's really an offer that I had extended to so many different cities and so many different mayors or mayor staffs, and said, hey, we're doing X right now, but we would love to work with you all to figure out how we can do something that's going to be more of a partnership, so that we're not asking you to come to something that's already prepackaged and built, and you come and you post it on Twitter and we take pictures. That's cool, but how do we build something together, right? Because we think that that's something that's going to be much more effective. And so that's something that I had said to Melissa was just, hey, thank you guys so much for coming. We'd love to figure out ways that we can work more closely with you all and build something together. And much to my surprise, she was just like, absolutely, let's do it, right? And so a few people will say stuff like that, but then for it to actually happen, when we started corresponding back and forth via email, it was like, oh wait, this is the real deal. This is the holy grail that we've been the opportunity to do this actual partnership where we're building something. And so to have it be right in our backyard was just such a special opportunity. And so even though it was definitely it happened organically, it was something that we very much were wanting to do at TCS. But I think it's one of those things that can be sometimes challenging for cities, because from city to city, when you come and you say, hey, I'm Lonnie Wisham, I'm calling from Tata Consultancy Services, I manage their government and community partnerships, the first thing they want to do is okay, so what is it that you guys are doing? And it's well, we have this education program where we do STEM education, and the first thing they want to say is, oh, we don't manage education. What we do, talk to the schools, talk to the schools, talk to the schools. And it's like, okay, no, that's cool. We do work with the schools. We absolutely want to work with the schools. But we also know that even the schools have a different perspective on the exact needs of a community than a city will, right? And so having a partner like Melissa, who one understood that almost immediately, was really cool, but also just having a partner who was willing to hear us out and say, okay, let me think about this different, because it's not like not a traditional box in which I would think to put a corporation in. And so I think that was a really important piece for us.
I think that's huge. And I think one of the other things that's so unique is when you have a corporation that's creating an initiative or a partnership like this, one of the immediate questions that people ask is, what is the ROI? And usually when you're thinking about that term, especially when a corporation is involved, you want it to be quantifiable. You want to hear a revenue answer. But this is a very unique partnership. And I think that the benefits for both Tata Consultancy Services and Edison are a little bit different kind of ROI. So how are you thinking about measuring the impact or success of this kind of initiative, especially in a way that would be able to convey the next time you get on the phone with an organization or a community and say, we're looking to work with you?
Okay. Well, I would have to say that from a return on investment, very immediate in terms of we weren't having all of the issues with vandalism. That was number one. I think number two is we held a second semester of the mentorship, because mentorship in and of itself is this inherent thing that you think will continue. It's not something that you have this program and then it ends. The whole idea is to follow these students. And we took a lot of time in deciding on what student population we were going to work with, because of the fact that we talked to educators in our school district and they said, listen, if you want to get these children, you want to get them in middle school, because that's prior to when their habits are fully developed. That's when it's that great time when they're really deciding and develop their study habits. By the time they're in high school, it's too late. It's too late. So with that recognition, we held a second semester. We learned some lessons from our first go around, that it was probably too academically driven and too structured after being in school all day. I mean, Lonnie and Hillary, aside from having them have a lot of food, it took a lot of, let's say, creative measures to get them to settle down and actually get involved with what they needed to do. But once we got there, it was fine. But that was one learning lesson that we learned. But the biggest thing was in measurement was every single student came back for the spring semester. And what we did in the spring semester was we went a little bit softer, did a lot more sculpting, art, all of the softer side of things, took them on a couple field trips to the township to learn about different careers in some of the police and fire, but then also allowed them, we have a television station, so they got to develop video, which you might see in the back. We sent some of it to everyone here today. They gave testimonials. So I think that was our measure. The idea will be to track these students throughout their high school career, even though they will end some of the students are going on to high school. I'm working right now to make sure that they have connections to our high school so that they don't get lost in the uber competitive, ultra, world of this tale of two cities, where you have most of the students worrying about what their SAT score is and what Ivy League school they're getting into, and then you have this other population that's not even sure where their next meal is coming from. So it's very unique. So we're working on that, and we're also going to ask those students who are freshmen to come back and actually serve as mentors to the other middle school students. And obviously, we want to continue our partnership with Tata, and we look forward to doing that.
And from our perspective on how we measure that return on investment, I think it can be challenging, frankly, because there's so many different things, especially when you're talking about a private corporation and how you're monitoring student data. Like, there's privacy concerns, and we always want to make sure that we're cognizant and respectful of that. So it's been challenging because we'll talk about the Go IT program. It's in its 10th year. We're celebrating 10 years of Go IT. So you guys clap for that. Yeah. So, and within that, we know that we've had a number of success stories where students have been exposed to Go IT, and that's change the trajectory of their lives, but it's impossible or almost impossible for us to like really track that, right? Because obviously, like I said, we're a private company, and it's difficult to kind of keep tabs on that type of stuff, right? So working with you all, they actually can monitor the students and see, okay, this cohort of students that we've had, these 25 students that went through the Edison Swag program, what are their outcomes? Are their outcomes different than their peers who are of similar backgrounds? And so I'm just really excited for some of the findings that we're gonna see over the next few years with this. And I also think that sometimes in our world, because since we are talking about businesses and we do want to measure things with quantity, and I definitely think that that's important to reach as many students as possible, but I also think that sometimes lost in that is the intrinsic value of just working with students and possibly changing students' lives, even if it's like a small number of students. And so I don't have the numbers to be able to articulate them yet. Hopefully we'll be able to see that over the next few years. But if any of you guys are sticking around for the reception afterwards, I'd love to speak with you about some of the different stories of students just who were just completely knowing going into it that they were not interested in STEM education, right? And I'd love to be able to say, oh, we changed their lives and now they are, and like they're computer scientists. Like there was maybe like one or two of those stories, but what I will say absolutely was the case for 100% of the students that weren't interested in it first. We would have industry leaders who would come in and say, oh, I work at Tata Consultancy Services. We're an information technology company. I don't do any technical stuff. I do the sales stuff, right? I do the marketing stuff. And so like seeing kids who were like not at all into the coding piece of it get really excited about being a part of this like future of work world and being a part of this whole thing, because they do have the gift of gab, but they're not necessarily like the best with computers, or they don't necessarily like, that's not necessarily something that they're most interested in. Like seeing that happen in front of you is like a really, really powerful thing. And I think that that's hard to quantify, right? Because that's not going to show up when we talk about 500,000 students helped over this many years. But like, I can tell you that has like value. And I would encourage everybody in here, with you guys understanding the value that has, make sure that you're going back and talking and fighting for those types of opportunities to be had, and not just getting so caught in the numbers, because we have to advocate a lot of times to people who may not understand these types of impacts, right? And so it's incumbent upon us to be able to communicate that to the people who are like more numbers driven and like focusing on the numbers. We have to be able to articulate these stories. And so this partnership has given us a ton of opportunity to do that. So.
Thank you. So I think you also just touched on some of the points about how many moving pieces there kind of are to get these things off the ground and to get them really to be successful. And obviously this individual partnership is not even close to the majority of your day jobs and all of the things that you have to be thinking about in your roles all the time. So how do you mitigate against some of the challenges and make sure that the partnership continues to work together when it may not be the main day job of any of the people who are involved?
Well, I would have to imagine, I think a big part of it is the passion and the level of commitment that you have on a personal level, right? Because at the end of the day, it truly was about, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but so much when I was talking to people, the mayor was incredibly supportive. But talking to the police and talking to other people, they kept saying, oh, well, that's just how it is there. That's just how it is there. And I said, no, this isn't how it should be anywhere. And let's get something going so that these students know they have an opportunity and have access and what have you. So, and I think Lonnie and also Hillary served as great role models, because it wasn't just coming in and teaching them the Go app. It was the personal connection that they made. And I think that's a huge component that is hard to quantify. You have to have people who have a passion, and on top of it, you have to have people that make connections and take that extra time. And I have to say, Hillary and Lonnie both did. They sat down one moment in particular. Hillary sat on the floor with the kids because it was the beginning, and she was trying to get them to focus. And she told a personal story about herself, because everybody comes to a situation and everybody's got preconceived notions, right, about who you are and where you came from and what you do. And Hillary in particular shared a very touching moment about her own background. And those types of things I know aren't quantifiable, but they mean everything in the world. And it's really people having a passion and trying to continue that passion and have these kids recognize that there was the possibility to have a career in IT or to be a programmer because, hey, I developed an app. Hey, I gave a presentation today. And some of these children, after leaving us, were sole supporters in their family. They went home, they cooked dinner, they went to the grocery store for mom and dad. So it was something where they were really able to recognize, they wanted connections, and they also wanted to know somebody cared about them. I know it sounds like so cliche, but it really was so true in the sense that you walked in and you said, how you doing? How's school? What's going on? Those little things that I think really made a difference and really made an impact.
Do you just want to add on that at all?
No, I think
So thinking about all of that you just said, and I think this question actually very much builds on it, but if I'm in the audience and I'm hearing this story and I said, this is incredible and I want to take this back to my organization or take this back to my community, what are the key ingredients, so to speak, that they need to be thinking about to get something like this off the ground, to make sure that something like this will actually work? Honey, you want to start?
Yeah, so one, I would say flexibility is a really big one. Flexibility and just patience, because one of the things that was very different about this partnership than others is a lot of times we'll work directly with the school or we'll work directly with the nonprofit partner. And the reason that that's so helpful is because they already have the infrastructure in place. They already have the processes in place to, manage the students, handle the logistics, like where are we eating, where is all of this stuff happening, what time are people being picked up, just any and everything is kind of there. And then we come in with our expertise, which is, obviously understanding what it is that an IT company is looking for, because we're an IT company, and being able to show our professionals and show people like living examples of IT workers, right? So be it developing something from scratch or something that didn't previously exist is a bit of a challenge, and it's something that I think is absolutely doable, but it's going to require you to have buy-in from leadership, which I think was amazing. Like Balaji and Lena were incredibly supportive of it. They were understanding of some of the bumps in the road when, maybe we wanted to launch during this date, but it couldn't happen for a variety of reasons. So we had to reschedule, and just having people who aren't going to say, okay, we're going to pull the plug, right? Because that would have been incredibly, I think that would have been like incredibly easy thing to do, but doing the right thing instead of doing the easy thing, I would say is a huge piece of it. And so when you go into something that's new, I think just having that understanding of, yeah, we need to be flexible. There may be bumps in the road that will change, and we're going to stick with it, because that's where it becomes a partnership versus just a, quid pro quo type thing where it's just like, hey, you give me this and I give you that. It's like, no, well, like this thing came up on our end, or this came up on Edison's end. And so we're having to rethink things, and just being patient with each other. I would say that is an incredibly important piece. I would also say having buy-in from the community is huge, because while there were 25 students in the program, but when I tell you that their community, their parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, just family members who grew up in the area but no longer live there, those people came and they showed up for those kids, right? And I think that having something like that I think it was really powerful. I think it showed something to the students, because it's one thing for myself or Hillary to say, hey, calm down, sit down and do this. But when your very, very best friend of your mom is there and she's like, hey, you need to stop because I'm going to tell your mom, that rings different, right? So I would say that that's also like another element of it, is just having that community buy-in. And I think that the community will buy in if you show that you are there for the long haul, right? because I think that a lot of times, especially when you're talking about overlooked communities or underserved communities, there's people who will just kind of like drop in and say, okay, I'm going to play like STEM savior and I'm going to come in and like help your kids and it's going to be amazing, right? And then when the program is done, you pack up and you leave and like they don't hear from you again, or the program didn't go the way you wanted it to go, or the program doesn't have the right numbers or the metrics, so you pull out. And I think over the course of months, convincing these parents that that wasn't the case here was a really big thing. So yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say adaptability and resilience, and making sure, because that was the biggest question that was asked when we came in and talking to people within the community that had been there for some time. They said, whatever you do, you have to make sure that you're there on a long-term basis, because most of these students are used to people dropping in and out of their lives continuously. And if you're going to want to make the impact, you have to make the commitment. And that was something that we knew, and also recognizing that we had to have several stakeholders putting the word out in the community, what we were doing, what we were planning to do, and why we were doing it. Because it comes under a lot of scrutiny and skepticism initially, especially when you're dealing with certain at-risk populations.
Thank you so much. I know that we are running over time, and I know that Carlos has some remarks, but I hope that everyone does stay for the reception and gets a chance to talk to these individuals. Yeah, go.
Oh, the last thing I'm going to say, and I know that we are like almost out of time. Anyone in here, if you are a part of a city, if you know people who are in city management, I would definitely encourage you guys to look at the model that Melissa and Mayor Lanke set for how to respond to challenges in your community, regardless of what level of challenges those are, whether it's violent crime, whether it's property crime, whatever it is. I think that the reaction to say, okay, we need to be tough on crime, we're gonna have a heavier police force here, we're gonna do this or that, I think that that's a very traditional approach, and I think that it's like one of the easier approaches. But figuring out how do you say, hey, how do we invest in these students more? Taking that approach is something that I think is incredibly brave and bold, and I think that those of us in this room have the ability to partner with someone who's willing to take that approach and help them be successful in it, because they're kind of taking a chance when they do that instead of responding in the traditional manner, right? So I would encourage everyone in here to encourage your cities to think about those types of approaches when these challenges come up. So.
Hey there. My remarks are simply to say thank you to all of our panelists throughout the day. I think we've gotten a great taste of public-private partnerships, right, at the local level, looking at higher education. Hopefully we've given you a little slice of that, working with our great partners at Tata Consultancy, Balaji, Lena, all of our team here. And of course, STEMConnector, Leslie, Ted, the entire STEMConnector team, too many to mention today. And I also want to thank the rest of our FIU colleagues that made it here today. Please, we have a reception upstairs at the rooftop. Use that as an opportunity to interact with each other. We have a great variety of folks in the audience. I see some corporate folks, as well as our students, of course, and many of our faculty members that are helping get this great work done at FIU.
We just need a little time to clear out this room.
Yeah, reception is on the rooftop. The far elevator, a little bit of housekeeping, is the way to the promised land upstairs. If you don't mind taking 3 flights of stairs, some might not want to, some might not mind. That's also near the elevator. Other than that, we thank you so much, and we look forward to having you back. We have one quick video on the way out, and thank you for visiting us.
The world faces major challenges. FIU has the solutions and top talent to make an impact.
Here in Washington, D.C., we're achieving results through people, policy, and partnerships. We're making great strides in Congress, at federal research agencies, and from our own FIU in D.C. on Capitol Hill.
We're bringing our A-game to transform our hometown and the world.
As a top-ranked Carnegie Research Institution and the 4th largest university in the country, FIU is uniquely positioned to help our federal partners on key challenges. They invest in our research initiatives. They visit our campuses in Miami and DC, and they use FIU in DC as their own access point for success.
Our students and faculty see FIU in DC as a lab, where ideas from the classroom are put into practice on a real-time global stage.
And our dynamic hub on Capitol Hill punches above its weight class, providing faculty researchers a platform to assert leadership in national dialogues and giving our alumni and visiting partners a place to call their own.
So are you ready? Ready to make an impact? Ready for your next horizon?
Welcome to FIU in Washington, D.C.